Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's APM event. My name's Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. I'm delighted that Andrew's back with us to share some top tips and skills on mastery of speaking. I would first like to say thank you to the APM branch volunteers, especially the APM Northwest branch Cumbria chapter, who have kindly put in their efforts to make today's event happen. So, if you would like to get involved in today's event, Andrew will welcome your questions and I'll put those to him at the end of today's session. To make that happen, please use your control panel, submit your questions, and time dependent at the end, I'll read those out to you. Read those out to Andrew, sorry. Andrew will be starting off just in camera mode, and then we'll be sharing presentations after a few moments. So please don't be alarmed if you don't see any presentations at first. It's all part of the show. So Andrew, great to have you back, and I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the warm welcome. I'm just going to put my cup down so I can get started. I just want you to think for a moment. I wonder whether you'd ever been to one of those conferences and you had high hopes for the main speaker, but then when the main speaker spoke, they stood behind a lectern, rooted to the spot, and they just read their slides. And their slides was just an assassination of bullet points. And you couldn't help but feel bit underwhelmed, a bit disappointed with what you heard. And I wonder whether there's anyone on this session where you've ever been in to hear a speaker and you knew that the speaker was well qualified and all, but the speaker started by trying to establish their own credibility by going on and on and on about themselves. And you can't help but think, just like, please cut to the chase. Please, I just came here for some good content. I didn't come here to listen all about all these amazing things you've done. And maybe there's somebody here on this session where you've been to a conference and you've heard a speaker and you knew that the speaker was sharing really good quality content, but they had such a drony voice and you were trying to pay attention and trying to pay attention. You just couldn't. You started thinking, what am I going to make for tea tonight? You're zoning in, you're zoning out. How do we engage people so that truly they listen to us, so that they take the action that we want them to take, so that truly we're memorable? Because actually, even if you're listening to a good speaker, research suggests that within 24 hours, you've forgotten 70% of what that speaker has shared. And we know ourselves that months later, what do you remember from the talk 4, 5, 6 months ago? How can we deliver content in a way so that truly we are memorable? Well, my name's Andrew Payne. I am a professional speaker. Give you an idea of the kind of stuff I do. Yesterday, I closed out a keynote conference for Gloucestershire County Council, talking around burnout. The day before, I was delivering actually a much smaller workshop to tutors at Leicester College. So on the one hand, I'm delivering group workshops and training. On the other hand, I'm doing larger keynote events. But it wasn't always that way. And if you'd have told me 12 years ago that today the vast majority of my work would basically be professional speaking, either in a room of 20 or 30 people or on in front of far more people, 200, 300, 400, I'd have been like, that is not for me. I am not a speaker. I used to be terrified of public speaking. So if I can do it, anybody can. You just need to know what to do and what not to do, and just start rehearsing what to do. And we're going to share some of those things today as we go through the content. I'm going to start with some real quick basic tips. And because they're quick and basic, I am going to skate straight through them because I'm going to assume that you pretty much already know that. Then I'm going to open up my slide deck and we'll look at how some of the ideas, how would I go about creating a compelling talk? I have a new talk that I'm currently, it's in the creation mode. And so these are some of the things that I will be doing. I'll also share some stuff around memory. What are some of the things we can do to help improve our memory so that we can process and memorize and deliver more stuff more reliably and with less stress? Let's start with some quick and easy wins. So when I sign a contract for a talk, if it's an online talk, usually in the contract, I have to sign up to say that I'm cabling up. That's how I'm connected internet-wise. And I would recommend this, even if you're just having a conversation with a panel of 3 people, or maybe they're your prospective clients. If you cable up, you do increase the chances that you'll have a good internet connection. Do invest in an external webcam. A Logitech 920 is a pretty good one to go for if you want to spend a bit more. That's about 80, 90 quid. You spend a couple of hundred, you can get a Logitech Brio. That's kind of the top range before you get into the really big money. But it makes a big difference in the quality of sound and in the quality of visual. And I know I've just tempted fate. My Logitech Brio probably now is going to stop working, and it will be a bit ironic. But do invest in these little things. It just helps give the other person on the other end of that online call, whether it's a member of an audience or a member of a team that you're working with, just gives them a better experience of talking to you. Some people would say, yeah, but like when you're in person, like what I need to know is, do I move about? Do I have my hands in pockets? Don't have your hands in pockets. It just looks a bit slouchy. Hands behind back. Victorian Undertaker, nah, don't do that. So what I generally would say in terms of just how you move when you're delivering in person is I try and move within about a meter circle. So I do move about, but I'm not a pacing lion in general. Now, yesterday when I delivered for Gloucester County Council, their keynote, their conference, it was a very unusual space, very long hall that's sort of and narrow. And so because the tables at the far back had a bird's eye view of me, I did move about a little bit. Most of my time I was in the main bit in my meter circle, but I did move as well. And some of that is down to sort of your instinct of the space. But in terms of your hands, and I often get asked this, well, if not in my pocket behind my back, what about if I fiddle with my head? Don't fiddle with your hair. It's just, if you have hair to fiddle with, that's great, but it can be annoying. I'm going to tread on a true box here, which is now just crushed, but I tend to have them just in front. I can't stand enough, just in front of my navel like that. If I'm not using my arms like that, because if they're just in front of your navel, just gently crossed, it's what's known as the neutral pose, and it allows you to then unfold your hands and use your hands a little bit, but then put them back so they're just sort of above your navel like that, and that's called the neutral pose. That works quite well for me. Do use your hands though. Research on TED Talks, the most viewed TED Talks have a third more hand movements than those that are not viewed. Somebody clearly has a lot of time on their hands to do that research. But with using your hands, you do have to watch yourself back. So record yourself on your phone, look at yourself and think, actually, there's using your hands, and then there's looking like you've drunk 26 espressos and you're a maniac. So try and, like I say, watching yourself back on the phone is a really good way to kind of visualize, well, how am I looking? What do I look like? It will be excruciating at first if you are not used to filming yourself, but this will help bring on your delivery style. The other basic I just want to share before we get into sort of the meatier content is, if your talk is going over sort of 10, 15 minutes now, you need to add in what I call their sort of breaking state tools. So it could just be that you say, hey, hands up anyone who has ever done this, or you could ask for a volunteer to do something, or you could put a visual up that wasn't there before, or you could show a video clip. If I don't do a lot of schools work, but I have done schools work. And if I was in a school and I wanted to make a point around social media and sensible use of phones and all that kind of stuff, I could tell the pupils that the average person checks their phone 120 times a day, according to some research. Or I could ask for a volunteer. No one's going to volunteer generally, so I'll just pick on someone to volunteer. They now look horrified. I say, don't worry, you've just got one small task for me to do. I want you to choose 3 volunteers. Then you're done. They choose usually their mates who are now standing up, like looking like, oh, thanks a lot. And then I ask them, how many times do you think research suggests the average person checks their phone? And whatever answer each of those people give, I'll then do a little poll. Hands up who thinks this person's right. Hands up who thinks this person's right. Then I reveal the answer. Now that whole spectacle has taken 4 or 5 minutes of time. But I'm not doing it to take up time. I'm doing it to break state. So when I'm delivering a keynote talk at a school, it's not just me talking for 45, 50 minutes where people's attention spans, they're just not that long. So again, for us, even when we're delivering to adults, start thinking about, well, if my talk's half an hour, if I know it's a half an hour talk, then what am I going to do at 8 minutes? What am I going to do at 15 minutes? What am I going to do at 25 minutes? Just to break the state a little bit, so it's not just me talking with no change at all. And so on that note, I'm going to attempt to bring in my slide deck because I want to get into how do we create content. And so I am going to just make this transition. Clearly it will be a seamless transition, hopefully so. And you should see a slide that says the start. And there I want us to just reflect for a moment. How do we create a compelling start that sort of calls people to attention, that grabs their attention? Because of course, when we sort of sit down, having come from another meeting, we're thinking about the last meeting, or maybe the row that we had with our partner the night before. So how do you step into that and command the room, but without behaving like a lunatic? Are there ways of doing it? I just want to share with you a story, a very true story of Aldo the Clown. Aldo the Clown was an entertainer that myself and my now ex-wife booked for my daughter's birthday party when she was 6. And there were loads of 5 and 6 year olds there. The place was heaving with 5 and 6 year olds. It was in one of these like church hall places. And they had all consumed far too much sugar. I'd not met Aldo the Clown or heard anything about Aldo. And I was thinking, I hope for Aldo's sake that he's the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger, because if he's not, he's going to be eaten alive. These children were out of control. Yet when Aldo turns up, he's this tiny little man. I'm thinking, I wanted to give him a hug. I wanted to say, look, it's not too late. You can change your mind. You can walk away. We can settle. I'll give you half payment and you can get out of here and it'll be okay. But Aldo the Clown walked into the hall. He was ready to start. The kids are there. They're like lions waiting to pounce on their prey. He walks down the middle of these kids. He's got a hat on his head, silly hat, falls off his head. One of the kids is like, you drop your hat, you drop your hat. And Aldo looked around and said very calmly, this is the first words he said at that dude. He just said, I know have a cat. And they were like, no, your hat, you've dropped your hat. To which Aldo said, a rat? No. Aldo kept this going for some time and then started moving into giving the kids, he had them spinning plates. He did a little bit of magic. He was joking around with them, but not once in his act, 45 minutes, not once did he raise his voice. He was as cool as a cucumber. He walked out of there without even breaking sweat. 2 weeks later in Birmingham City Library, I was there with my daughters. They'd come and we knew that there was a clown coming, and so that was great. We'll see another clown. Aldo was pretty good. How good will this guy be? This guy in Birmingham City Library, several weeks later, was enormous. He came in shouting, working at fever pitch. I was like, whoa, what kind of an entrance was that? This is amazing. Then after 5 minutes, he's got nowhere to go, really. He started at fever pitch, and he's trying to build on top of that, and it was exhausting to listen to him. The kids within 10, 15 minutes were shifting around, fidgeting. He could see he was losing them. After his half-an-hour show, when he left, he was pouring with sweat. He looked like a broken man. The point of that comparison is that you don't need to be massively charismatic and gregarious and outgoing to command the room. You just need to have some techniques that enable you to command the room, but without breaking too much sweat. And I want to share the 3 techniques that I use every single time, in that I use one of these 3 techniques. And I'm not going to share these and say, actually, I use these 3 quite a bit, but there's a killer 4th technique, which you have to contact me afterwards and enroll on some big expensive program. These are the 3 techniques, and I will use one of these 3 techniques as I start every single time, because they work, because they allow me to walk onto a stage or walk into a room in the calmest possible way and just start chatting to people and then I can build my intensity from there, should I wish to. First, superb starting tool that I use, and this is how I started this session. I wonder if there's anyone here who's ever been to one of those conferences and I gave you 3 examples. Or if we were in person, I could have said, hey, hands up here, anybody who has been to one of those conferences. No doubt people would have put their hands in the air. Now, the key to this is that there are 3 questions that you ask, and I'm going to come back to the power of 3 later in this session. The key to this also is that the questions you ask must be relevant to what you're about to share. I couldn't have said to you, hands up, I wonder if anyone here has had breakfast this morning, because that's completely irrelevant. It's a question, but it's an irrelevant question. The questions need to be relevant so that they're leading people into thinking about whatever it is you're going to share about. The 3 questions that I asked in today's session and that I would always ask, they must be questions that most people could say, oh, yeah, no, I remember that was me too. You notice that I didn't ask you, hands up here, anybody who's seen Tony Robbins speak live, because I'm looking, There is 260 people, just several more on this session. I suspect if I did a poll now, that a handful of you might have once upon a time seen Tony Robbins speak live, but most of you won't. The questions that you ask need to be questions where most people could go, oh yeah, no, I relate to that. 3 simple questions that just cut through the noise and indicate from the very start that you're after some participation and thinking. You're not just going to talk at them and expect them to be passive. The second thing you can do is something unexpected, something off the wall, maybe something a bit like this. Now, I'm not sure if this video, let's just see if this plays as a video. It might do. It hasn't done. Oh, I was about to play you some Theresa May footage of her prancing on stage at the Tory conference, and for some reason that hasn't worked, but that doesn't matter. Theresa May, when most of us remember that, where she danced onto stage to Dancing Queen, and it was a bit orcs when you saw it. And part of the reason it was orcs was because Theresa May hadn't rehearsed that. When she was interviewed after she was no longer the Prime Minister, when she was interviewed sort of in her memoirs, she's been honest that it was just an on the spur of the moment thing. And my point to you is, if you're going to do something crazy and off the wall, it has to be rehearsed. You've got to be sure it will land. If you're going to come onto the stage dressed as a chicken, I don't know why you would, but let's just say that seemed to be a good idea because of the content you're about to share. Then you need to be on your hands and knees and peck the floor and cluck and flutter those wings and do everything else. But if it seems that you're not sure whether it's landing and you're hesitant, the whole thing will fall flat. And even if you deliver it absolutely 100% chicken, it may actually still fall flat. So when I say unexpected, I don't ever do anything crazy and off the wall. It's just too risky. For some people that might find something funny, there'll be others that you offend. And even if the majority of the room finds something funny, if I've offended some people, that's not good. I don't want that. So the unexpected technique that I use is I either start with a story or some reflections. So some of you on this session might have sat in on my burnout session that I did a while ago. And I always start my burnout session with some reflections of this roller coaster century we have so far had, the 21st century. What a roller coaster ride it's been. And I share some stuff from 9/11. I'm pretty quick as I work my way through the banking crisis, the horror show that's been Brexit, the unfolding environmental crisis, COVID. I share some humor within that as well to keep it light. But as I share those reflections, that's not how people thought I was going to start. But it's a lovely way to get people thinking about, actually, it has been a roller coaster ride. So therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that burnout is the big deal that it is today. And then I'm in. And then I could introduce my name and give a couple of sentences about my bio. There are some instances where a few sentences about your bio is really important, but keep it brief. But I've started in an unexpected way with some reflections on the 21st century. Or I could start with a real story. So for some of you that may have seen my TEDx talk on domestic abuse is my sort of secondary speaking niche. I do deliver. I was delivering it last night to a social work student. Usually it's to public sector organizations that I deliver on domestic abuse. But I generally start my domestic abuse talk with the episode. If you look at the TEDx talk that I did, where I was actually stabbed by my ex-wife, and I start the story. I start the talk with that story, so people are in, and people are like, "Wow, crazy." Then I need to lighten the mood because it's quite a tough story to start with, and start unpacking the wider subject, which is domestic abuse. But you can start with a story or a reflection, but it must be relevant. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but I saw a lady, a copywriter at a conference, do a talk, and it was all stuff. She was sharing tips about copywriting and marketing. And I remember she started this story about where she'd hurt her leg whilst doing a little ski jump, but it didn't really bear any relevance to any of the points she was making. So you started to think, where's she going with this? And that's not what you want your audience to think. So make sure your story and reflections are relevant. And if you're going to go for off the wall and you're going to be brave, fair enough. Some people start in that way, but it must be rehearsed and well thought through. The other way that I start is simply with 3 facts. Again, the power of 3. We'll get to that shortly. So my critical decision-making session, I will share several statistics that McKinsey & Company, the global management consulting group, did on decision-making in business, which leads into my talk about the fact that actually time spent on improving decision-making abilities is time well spent. But those facts, they won't be really obvious facts. There'll be a fact. So the first of the fact, for example, is that all of the people surveyed by McKinsey & Company, only 20% of them said that they work for organizations that excelled in decision making. That's not a fact that you are obviously going to know. You know that butter is a dairy product. That's an obvious fact. I'm not going to share anything really, really stupidly obvious. But you could start your talk with 3 facts. If those facts share some kind of learning and lead into your subject. So you've got your hands up, 3 questions. Is there anybody here who has ever? You could start with a story or reflections or something crazy. I personally don't do anything crazy. I start with story reflections, or you could use facts. But any of these techniques enable you to just wander onto a stage and just start chatting to people in a really understated way. And then you can build intensity should you wish to. So what about, you've done the start. What else? What else am I going to consider as I start to build my talk? Well, I need to be clear on the close. Too many people, when they close, they just give a summary of what they've just said, and people are already switching off. Or too many people, and I often see this with chief execs when they do their sort of company conference, obviously not the chief exec yesterday, but I do often see this, where they'll sort of deliver some information and they've delivered something. There's no particular close. Your close should be your call to action. There should be something that you want the group that you're speaking to do next. Otherwise, what's the point of your talk? I find it really helpful to think about my very clear call to action, because then everything within the talk can build towards that point. It helps me to cut out some of the waffle, because if I've got my close in mind, and as I'm going through my content, I can ask myself the questions, well, so what? Who cares about that point? Is that building? Is that relevant? Can I cut that bit? Can I be more punchy in the way that I'm delivering stuff? But it helps if I know what my close is. And bear in mind with the call to action, let's say today's session, what I really want is for all of you to love what I've delivered and to go to your organizational development leads within your employers, or if it's a smaller employer, your CEO. If I wanted you to do that and make an introduction and, hey, Andrew does stuff on burnout, critical decision making, speaking skill. If I want you to do that, I need to ask you at the end. I need to say to you very clearly, please go and speak to your organizational. I need to spell it out. Otherwise, you probably won't do it because life's busy. Life just happens. If I want you to post something nice about me online on social media that you really enjoyed this session, I need to ask you to do that so that you will. So when you're building your own talk, think very clearly about your close. Think of the close as a call to action and not a summary, would be my advice. When I'm creating content, I like to know what my audience's pains and aims are. And see, psychologists argue that some of us are more away and some of us are more towards. So if you're away, for example, you're motivated to take action because you want to avoid pain. So let's say you're away and you want to lose weight. You're more motivated to lose weight because you want to prevent health implications later on in life. That is your motivation for taking the action that you're going to take. If you're towards, you're more motivated by taking action to achieve great things. So maybe in a weight loss scenario, you're imagining your buff figure on a beach, and that's what's driving you forward to take the action you're going to take. Now, psychologists argue that some people are more away and some people are more towards, but I can only speak for myself. I'm a mix. It depends what day of the week it is. It depends how sleep deprived I am. It depends how busy I am, whether I'm away or towards. It depends what the thing is. So when we're creating content, we need to imagine if people are motivated by away and towards, I need to think about what are their pains and aims? What are the things they might be striving to achieve? What might be some of the things they're striving to avoid? And how do I reflect some of that in my content? I must keep that in mind. And so a lot of my work comes to me through speaker agents. A lot of it in the current climate is quite last minute, but I am quite pedantic that I like to speak to the organization that I'm going to deliver to. I want to know what their pains and aims are, because that might have an effect on what I deliver. I want to give them value. But in order to give them value, I need to know what their pains and aims are. Now, if you have content where you've got a compelling start, a compelling call to action, you're aware of the audience's pains and aims, you're really starting to create something. You've really got the bones of a good talk that will be beginning to develop. Do use stories. And I want to just touch briefly on stories. There's so much about storytelling and how to do that. The way I see the use of stories in content is you've got personal stories and you've got business stories. And they're two very different things, and there is a value in using both. For your personal stories, you might think, well, I've never canoed across the Atlantic solo. I've never climbed Mount Everest in only my underpants. So I don't know what kind of a story I've got to share. And I would say to you, no. You don't need some crazy story. Your everyday stories, there will be learning that some of your everyday stories will illustrate a point beautifully, and we can relate to them because we're also human. We also have kids, or we're single and we don't like being single, or we do like being single. We have financial concerns, we have health concerns. We can share in that. And so draw on some of your personal stories. So for example, think about all the different areas in your life. Your physical environment is the stuff that goes on in your house, your office, your car, your self-esteem and how that develops and how that gets affected over the years. The personal development, the things that you're doing to develop yourself, your friends, family, your hobbies, your health, your finances, your work. Think about the little things that are happening. Actually, that time when you were 6 and you were asked by your 8-year-old sister to pay her back for the money you borrowed for some sweets the week before, and you burst into tears, there could be an illustration and an insight from there that backs up what you're delivering in business really well. The point with personal stories is to just use a few of them, but not loads of them, because in a business setting, we want examples that we feel are relevant to our work. So for example, in my critical decision-making workshop, I do use examples of my own decision-making within that abusive marriage that I was in, some of my examples of my decision-making since and some of the boundaries that I have, examples from my decision-making within my own business, within the charities that I support, but I bring in a mix, and that is good, that's valuable. So start thinking about, well, where are my bank of stories? Are there funny things that have happened that actually I could tell them in a quite succinct way, but that there is a clear illustration of a point where people can relate to it and they can also see the point of that story? Because long after we've forgotten about stats and digits and percentages, we'll remember stories for years. The business story, though, is slightly different. I see a business story as this. This is how you tell a business story. You need to very clearly clarify the pain that your customer was in before you got involved with them. You need to clarify very clearly what you specifically did as a business to alleviate that pain, so it's clear what you do. And then you need to make very clear how that person was left in a better position because you did business with them. I go to so many of these networking events. Well, not so much anymore, to be fair, but I used to go to so many of these networking events where the B&I events where everybody, there's like 40 people in the room and everyone has a minute to stand up and sit down and share about themselves and sell themselves. It's so tedious. After like the 20th person, you're like, oh man, how long is this going to carry on for? But you always remember the ones where instead of saying, let's say they were a commercial law practice, or let's say they were a legal practice, they do commercial law, family law, probate, conveyancing. If that person representing that legal company stood up and told one excellent, powerful, compelling story following these 3 areas, the pain before, specifics of what they did, better place now that business has been done, that is what you'll remember. If that representative stands up and say, hey, I work for Wallingford and Co, we do conveyancing, we do commercial, you've already switched off, you're not even listening. So we do need to identify powerful stories within our own business that really illustrate how brilliant we are as a business. With some of the charities that I support and that I speak for, I have very good lines of communication that bring the stories to me so I can tell those stories, because I know that if I tell people what we do, if I give them the stats, people go, that's very nice, Andrew, what a lovely charity, and they won't make any donations. If I, however, tell them some powerful stories, it's not that they definitely will make donations, but I get more donations, I get more excitement, more interest, not just donations. How do I get involved in your charity? Excellent, because that's good too. So do tell personal stories, make sure they're relevant, make sure they're told succinctly. Do tell business stories. Find out these, if you can't think of any, then you need to go and find some so that you have them at your fingertips and you can tell them really easily. And a note with storytelling, you need to rehearse. If you start telling stories just off the cuff without any rehearsal, the likelihood of you getting facts wrong, well, that likelihood goes up. The likelihood of you sort of stuttering and pausing while you're trying to remember what happened, so you're beginning to lose credibility. Did this happen or didn't? This person doesn't look that sure. You're likely to add in facts that didn't exist before just because you're in storytelling mode and you're aware people are watching you and you're beefing up your story. You don't want to do that either. So with your stories, you can do some prep. If you don't have a talk to do yet, but you might have one to do in 3 months' time, start gathering some stories and rehearsing them so that what you tell, you can tell with integrity and you can tell them fluently. Let's say you've got a range of stories. You've got your close, you've got your start. You know about the Paynes and aims, you've reflected that in your content. This is all good stuff. There are some things you can do though to sharpen your language. Now, there's loads of things you can do to sharpen your language. In the time that we have today, I'm just going to share 2 language tricks. The first is this, tricolon. Some of you might know what this is, but this is really the power of 3. It's where you deliver a paragraph in sort of 3 sets. So let's say you want to make a point that your dairy, your ginger and dairy fudge that you make at home is the best fudge ever. You might say, it's the best fudge ever because, and give a point. It's the best fudge ever because, and give a second point. It's the best fudge ever because, and you deliver it in three clauses, in 3 separate sentences, but each sentence starts with the same words. Tricolon is also where you have phrases of just 3 words as well. That's an example. So let me give you some examples so you can kind of really get your heads around what I'm saying here. So I don't know, I mean, I'm 47, I'm showing my age here, but we probably remember this advertising slogan that lasted for years. A Mars a day helps you work, rest, and play. It's tricolon. What about this one? Again, showing my age. Andrex loo rolls. Well, they're not anymore because their slogans change. They have to change every now and then. But once upon a time, and for many years, they were soft, strong, and very long. Of course, they were never soft and strong. It has to be soft, strong, and very long. It's tricolon. Let's think about some of our nursery rhymes. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. How did your garden grow? With silver bells, 1, cockle shells, 2, and pretty maids, 3, all in a row. It's tricolon. What about rub-a-dub-dub? Oh, 3 men in a tub. Funny that it's not 2 or 5 or 10. So it's mostly going to be 3. Who do you think they'd be? Well, the butcher, 1, the baker, 2, the candlestick maker, and so on and so forth. This is Barack Obama's closing speech as the president. One of the most important speeches a president will give in terms of their legacy. And if you see here, apologies for all the text on one slide, but if you see here, he's got 3 paragraphs, but it's in a pattern of 3. If you're tired of arguing with strangers, if something needs fixing, if you're disappointed, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself. So you've got a pattern of 3 phrases, and his final sentence of the call to action, grab a clipboard, 1, get some signatures, 2, run for office yourself. It's tricolon. If I had told you 8 years ago, if I had told you that we would open up, if I had told you that we would win, you might have said our sights were set. It's tricolon, and all the leading politician speechwriters, this is what they do. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but we can use this for ourselves, and I'll show you how I've used it in the marketing for this speaking skills workshop. This is the marketing that I tend to use. We've all been there and endured it. And of course, I've listed 3 pain points. I didn't list 2. It's always going to be 3. The list of personal qualifications, the corporate PowerPoint slides, the droning voice. We go on through my marketing and I ask 3 questions. Of course, I ask 3 questions. I'm not going to ask 2. Did you remember? Did you take? Did you learn? Oh, and I carry on with tricolon. Would you believe it? Anyone can be a brilliant speaker. Anyone can captivate. Anyone can hold the room. You just need to learn how. It's tricolon. The other thing that we can use to just sharpen our language and make it really accessible, and the value of tricolon is it has this kind of lyrical quality to it, a really rhythmic pattern to it. So do use tricolon as you're putting your content together. The other thing that you can use are metaphors, where you bring a situation to life by the words that you use. They convey imagery just in the word that you use. So let me just give you an example, a working example of this. So Donald Trump, in his successful campaign election, whether he was helped by the Russians or whether he wasn't, one of the slogans that really caught on was drain the swamp, which is tricolon, by the way, as well as a metaphor. Drain the swamp. And the beauty of that as a metaphor was it really caught hold. There was this sense of sort of Washington sort of festering, and it needed clearing out. But the beauty as well of using metaphors is he's not said 50% of Democrats are corrupt. He's not trapping himself with statistics that he then later has to defend. He's just chucking out an image and making people imagine and do the rest. Boris with COVID, he likes a metaphor or two, doesn't he? First of all, he was going to send COVID packing. Let's get rid of it. Send it packing, because we're better than COVID. We're stronger than COVID. Then after he got ill and he sort of maybe had a temporary reality check on COVID, he describes it as an invisible dark mugger waiting to attack us. So we're really on edge, looking over our shoulders for where COVID's going to strike. Then he's going to wrestle COVID to the floor. This kind of sense of macho Boris taking on COVID for the sake of his country. And these are just images, but they're powerful images. Now, I would say Boris takes it too far. I would say with metaphors, you need to use them sparingly. And I don't know if you recall the metaphor. It really made me laugh, because this was like, where it's like, Boris, you have gone too far with your metaphors. Where the vaccination, we realized it was going to be effective and they were about to start rolling it out. It wasn't quite ready. And he described the distant tooting of bugles, but the cavalry isn't quite here yet. And I would say that is metaphors gone bonkers. But do use some metaphors. So let's again look at my marketing for this workshop. The list of personal qualifications which the speaker takes 10 minutes to wade through. So I'm sort of creating this sense of just stickiness and like real effort, and it's hard going just by using that word. The corporate PowerPoint slide riddled with bullet points. No slide is ever riddled, but the word riddles, we're kind of seeing all these bullet holes and just like, oh yeah, I can see that. Now, I could have used, because it's slightly humorous, I could have used exaggeration. I could have said the corporate PowerPoint slides riddled with 146 bullet points. And again, in terms of humor, we can exaggerate when we're being humorous. That can be effective. But some of these metaphors, they just convey imagery. They just bring things to life. And I would bring in some metaphors. You naturally use it anyway in some of your language. You could say someone's very busy. They live a fast-paced life. Or you could say they live their life at 100 miles an hour. We often hear that, and that just conveys this image of like crazy speed and maybe heading for a crash at that speed as well. Now, some of you might think, well, this is all good, but like, listen, what I really love are some tips about memory, because if you're like me, you're in your late 40s, you can feel the brain cells fading. So what can we do to memorize content? Well, Yanja Wintersol is one of the world memory champions. And there's some simple things that we can do that she does. She doesn't have a super brain, by the way. She doesn't have an all incredible brain that we can't copy. But there are some lifestyle habits that she has. You can probably guess them for yourselves. She does drink alcohol, actually. She just doesn't drink very much alcohol. She eats a healthy, natural diet. Yes, very boring. And wouldn't it be great if she just ate takeout food the whole time? But she doesn't. She meditates a lot. And research on students shows that those who start meditating and sort of taking training in mindfulness, their memory recall is substantially improved over those that don't do that. So again, some of these habits, you can be mindful without a yoga mat and incense. You can be mindful just by creating some new disciplines, taking mindfulness breaks during your day, just for 5 minutes here and there. And this over time, it's a small win, but eventually you clean up your diet. You sleep a lot. That's the other thing Yanja Wintersol says. She sleeps a lot. You improve your sleep patterns. These things then come together as small wins to create a bigger win. Now you're like, yeah, but you know, there must be some clever tricks. Well, tell me what, Yanja Wintersol, what's the trick that she uses? Well, let me tell you. I'm going to tell you the trick, and I guarantee you won't want to do it. So what she does, let's say she's in a world memory contest, and there's like 500 random digits. She's got to memorize them. Normally it's not as many as that, to be fair. I'm just plucking a figure out of the air. She's got to memorize it in 10 minutes and recall it immaculately. So what you or I see are 500 digits. That's not what Yanja sees. See, she's got her own code now that turns those digits into a language, into letters and a language, which she uses to create in her mind a story. And the story will always be located somewhere that she knows. So I'm from Birmingham. So if I was doing it, I'd probably make it Gas Street in Birmingham. I know some of the shops and cafes and the canals around there. And her story, as she's translating these digits into this personal code that she's created, the story will have lots of crazy things going on it because it's just more memorable. There'll be things that are a bit yucky, things that are a bit scary because that's what we remember more vividly. So it might be some the digits, the way that the digits have fallen. She has a broccoli attacking an elderly lady who's then rescued by a canal boat, and then as she's then asked to recall those digits, she's then recalling that, she's then swapping that story back into digits. It's like translating another language. And it's taken her years, as it takes all the world memory champions years, to develop that code and to be able to translate it that quickly and that easily. And if you ever see a world memory champion recalling what they're supposed to remember, they're always very slow. They'll recall it flawlessly. And the reason it's slow is because they're having to translate their vivid images back into the numbers or the meaningless random content that they've got to have remembered. So you're probably thinking, well, I haven't got time to create a personal code. I don't want to be a world memory. I just want to be a bit better at remembering my content. Here's how I memorize my TEDx talk. I think this is a bit more accessible, and this is what I would suggest that you do if you haven't got time to create your own personal code. You've got to think about your memory and learning things rather than trying to tip a bucket of water over your head as a drip session over many, many days and weeks. So when I did my TEDx talk, I knew 4 months before that I secured the slot, and all the other speakers did too. But the other speakers, they didn't do anything about the TEDx event, so only several weeks before. Some of them were talking now, we'll take several days off work. No, don't do that. It's too late by then. You're already stressed because it's getting near to the event. And although I'm not going to go into the science of this, when we are stressed, that the parts of your brain that are responsible for memory recall, they don't work as well. You need to memorize in a time where you are calm and composed. And some people say, I thrive on stress. What are you talking about? That's when I'm at my best. I'm not so sure. You know, there's a Californian cyclist whose name escaped. I was reading about him a few days ago. Elite cyclist, didn't get onto the team. But he started robbing banks and escaping on his bike, and the buzz of it was addictive. And I think last minute merchants get addicted to the buzz of being last minute, but actually scientifically, if you look at neuroscience, last minute itis is not a helpful habit if you want to remember stuff really effectively. Your brain can't possibly take in so much information in one go. So when I got news of the TEDx talk, it's 4 months away, I was appointed my speaker coach, because it was a good event and you get your own speaker coach. And normally she doesn't even start working with the speakers till 6 weeks before. With 4 months before, I contact her immediately and I'm like, if you've got time now, I want to hammer the script out now so I can start learning it in the way that I do. She's never ever worked with any TEDx speaker that's ever started as early as I did. But I know that I don't want to spend hours in a day revising a script because it's boring. I want to spend just like 10, 15 minutes every day or many weeks in a drip fashion, because I know that if I do that, success is inevitable. There's no way I'm going to forget. This sense of my mind going blank, it will be impossible for that to happen because that script will have been so well drilled into my mind over so many weeks, I can't fail. Because of that, I'm in a relaxed state of learning. I've started early. So usually when I was going over the script, it will be after the kids are in bed, I'll put a bit of classic FM on just to kind of relax me, and I'll start reading the script. 3 or 4 months, you know, well, it took me a good 6 weeks to actually hammer out that script, but I'm still so early. And so in the first week or two, I'm just reading that script. I'm not even going to try and learn it parrot fashion. I just want to get my mind familiar with it. But already in those early weeks, I'm beginning to see where I can break down segments. It's very difficult to learn 1,500 words in one go. But if I'm learning little bits of 50 words here, 100 words there, I've got to learn where they link. That's okay, I've got time. And I'm relaxed, and my brain is in its optimum state for learning. I learn the segments over time. I'm putting them together. So at the first time we met as speakers for that TEDx event, 7 or 8 weeks before the event, nobody else has even written their script. I've written mine. I've already started learning it. I'm not flawless, but I'm not far off. 4 weeks before the event, the dress rehearsal, I'm flawless in delivery. There's just a few things I'm going to sharpen up. The other speakers are still faffing about with their scripts. So my point to you with talks, get in there early as you can do, and just learn a little bit every evening as a discipline. If it's an important talk, every night, just a little bit of time, learn in that drip way, and you won't fail. But if you save it all for the day before, it's too much for your brain to take in. And what if you've got a kid at nursery who has to come home sick and suddenly that's wiped out some of your day? towards the last few weeks, what I'm doing now is I'm filming myself, I'm watching the filming, I'm watching delivery, and I'm continuing to practice, but I'm not at all stressed because I already know the talk. Good sleep is imperative. I'm not going to talk about the science behind it because of time, but you will focus more effectively, you will recall more effectively. When you sleep in a deep state, you have these things called human growth hormones that revitalize your body, your mind, your memory, your physical functions as well. And so we do know that in ancient times, some people had their sleeps in several sleeps, but generally we are the first generations to be trying to survive on 4, 5, 6 hours sleep in a 24-hour cycle. There's always an exception to the rule, but for the most part, sleep scientists say this is unhealthy and it is not sufficient for what we need to be able to process. So that's it. Fairly straightforward list. If you want to create lovely slides, I'm not, and I'm going to finish in the next sort of 5 minutes or so to answer this up for questions, to open it up for questions. I'm colorblind and I'm a technophobe, so I've got a bit of a disadvantage. But what I would say is nobody really wants slides with loads and loads of text on them. So if you're going to have some text, just have it in a simple Arial font that everyone can read more easily. Have it white on a black background or a dark color on a white background. And when you use images, these sites are great. You can get free stock images. They're high definition images. You can stretch them over the whole slide. And think of your slide deck as a supporting role to you as a speaker. It shouldn't be the key focus. And if you have a slide deck, as I have today, if the slides don't work, you should know your stuff well enough. It doesn't matter. You just ditch the slides. It's fine. Have that backup plan. Know what you would do, because once you rely on slides, you're introducing an element of risk into that slide deck. You've noticed with my slides, there's no fancy lights and I haven't got slides crashing into each other and we have like the big bang going on. It's just a simple fade in, fade out, which I think is just a bit more appropriate, perhaps. I think when it's all zingy and zam flashy, it takes it away from you as the speaker need to be the center of attention. Make your slides sort of image based. Try and reduce down on the amount of text because it's boring, and try not to read your own slides if you're in person. You need to know your slides well enough that it's up in the background and you may give a cursory glance as you swap slides, but that's it. If you're now reading your slide, you do not know your presentation well enough, would be my point. So, don't know how to memorize. I just want to do 5 minutes on imposter syndrome. Then I promise, I'll hand back for some questions. Imposter syndrome is this thing where you feel like you're about to get found out. It's like a loss of confidence. You are lacking in confidence in yourself. But the big difference between imposter syndrome and sort of low confidence is imposter syndrome, you're terrified about being found out. And it's difficult. For some people, it's really debilitating. It holds them back from putting themselves forward for things they would otherwise put themselves. They say, I'm not qualified for this. I'm not. For some people, if they're getting involved in public speaking in some way, whether you're delivering to a team or your company conference or in another way, you feel like I don't deserve to be here. What if they think I'm rubbish? What if they find out that I'm not as good as I thought I was at one point? And the thing I would just say, and the thing that I do get imposter syndrome from time to time. Everybody gets imposter syndrome from time to time. In fact, the Kruger-Dunning effect, which is a human bias, is the more skilled you become at something, the more lowly skilled you think you are, most people. So imposter syndrome is common. So the first thing, if you know that you suffer from imposter syndrome, know that you're not alone and it's normal. Have a conversation with your colleagues. There'll be others that will say, yeah, do you know what? That happens to me all the time. It happens to me all the time. How I manage it is that I reassure myself that actually I really respect anyone that has a PhD. It's not something that I would choose to do. I think I would struggle to get a PhD for different reasons. But I have as much respect for someone with a PhD as someone that's gone through a difficult divorce, as someone that's a parent, and there's learning and insight that they can share that will challenge my thinking in some way. We all have different experiences, different life stories, and I've made peace with that, because sometimes I'm presenting to highly qualified people. I did my burnout session recently to an NHS team, and within that team were some very experienced psychologists, and I had to really kind of go, whew, okay, I can do this. I know the stuff. I know a lot of the insights will be helpful for them. I know there's new stuff in there, but I had to talk myself through it just to manage that imposter syndrome. But I think the more we can value experience, life experience, alongside academic experience, I think that does help. The more we can understand that everyone suffers from imposter syndrome, not just us, I think that helps. And the more that we realize that it really kicks in when we're stepping out of our comfort zones and putting our head above the parapet, then maybe we need to see imposter syndrome as a good thing, a reminder that we're trying to move forward, and we need to try and give it a hug and laugh at it so that we take its power away from when it doesn't have a power over us. The last thing I'm going to share on imposter syndrome was years ago, I spoke at a TEDx event, which was a shambolic affair. And thankfully, it was so bad that the video didn't even get properly recorded. So the whole thing can be forgotten. There's no evidence of this terrible event I was part of years ago. But the guy who had the most extraordinary bio, he traveled the world. He was working on peace negotiations with governments. And I remember seeing his bio thinking, I can't speak. I hope I'm not speaking after him. Like, he's just amazing. And look at my bio. There was another guy speaking at that event, and his bio was literally primary school teacher. And I felt so sorry for him. Like, I wanted to put my arm around him and say, listen, dude, I'll spend some time with you working on your bio. I felt like I was somehow in the middle. Mr. Superstar, traveling the world, was a terrible speaker. No one knew what he was talking about. He was completely owned by his slide deck, reading his slides, loads of books, talking too fast, not making any sense. Primary school teachers stood up and stole the show with a simple story that we could relate to. He talked to us. He had a few slides, but they were in the background. I guess he's a teacher who's used to being on his feet. He was fantastic. So again, in terms of imposter syndrome, I remember that story now. And if I see that there's other speakers with an extraordinary experience in bio, I'm not put off by that. I'm not thinking, wow, and there's lowly me. I'm just thinking, well, that's great. They're going to deliver value with their experience. I'll deliver value with mine. Now, some of these self-management techniques, if you have imposter syndrome and it's really quite severe, you see, for me, there's two types. There's a moderate imposter syndrome that most of us suffer from, and with some self-management techniques, we can work our way through it. If you have severe imposter syndrome, then there's more work that might need to be done on where that comes from. It's not always that it's come from childhood trauma. Some people say that it has. I'm not that convinced that it has. Sometimes it's just bad habits and bad memories that have just blown up over time. And you may need some counseling support. But if you know you have severe imposter syndrome, please talk to someone, because there are others that do as well. You are not alone. You do not have to be alone in suffering with imposter syndrome. So I'm going to hand back for some questions in a moment. But just to say, of course, as I alluded to not that long ago in this presentation, if you've enjoyed some of the content I've shared today, and you feel like, hey, this would be great to do a fuller workshop. Maybe we could record ourselves and improve our, we could create content together. I'd love you to put me in touch with your organizational development lead if you have one. If your organization is smaller, I'd love a conversation with your CEO if you think there would be value. If not, but you've really enjoyed this session, I would love you to say something on social media and tag me in, particularly on LinkedIn and Twitter. I don't do a lot on Facebook these days, but LinkedIn and Twitter, that mean a lot to me. But regardless, I'm going to hand back for questions and really hope that in some of what I've shared, there is something of value for everyone. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Let's have some questions if there are any.
Excellent. Firstly, thank you, Andrew. We've had a lot of lovely comments come through. I'm just going to quickly read out Dan's, who said, sadly, he can't stay on for the questions, but he's really enjoyed the session and has taken away a lot of key notes for a talk that he's actually giving next week. So he's asked me to pass on his thanks. I just thought I'd also use that opportunity to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and will be made available on APM YouTube as well. So I'm going to dive straight into the questions. So Sharon has said, do you have any hints and tips for the so-called graveyard shift after lunch, engaging with your audience?
Yeah. I mean, I would reiterate what I said at the beginning about having those kind of break state tools. I do often do a graveyard shift. Unfortunately, partly, I suppose, because I'm regarded as a fairly energetic speaker, they'll put me on to try and create the energy levels. I do think, even if it's a keynote talk that you're doing, that getting people to break out, even if it's for 2, 3, 4 minutes to share some thoughts or an idea, is really helpful. So if I've got a graveyard shift, I tell you what, if I've got 40 minutes, an hour, half an hour, there will be breakout. I will stop talking and get them into groups to do something or other, and then we'll come back and will reflect on that learning, but you've got to get them doing something. If it's just you talking, that's what you must avoid at all costs in the graveyard shift. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sharon. Craig has asked, good presentation, Andrew. Thank you for the tips. Do you have any specific advice for those who have neurodiverse, such as those with ASD, who may inherently have motor non-speech and social anxiety? Monotone speech, sorry.
Yeah, I don't have specific tips. I think what I would say is I do my homework before the event that I deliver. And if it comes to my attention, so I did an event for a college several years ago where I didn't realize, because the agent didn't tell me, it come through an agent, that there were several people there with quite severe cerebral palsy. And I was about to do loads of stuff that would involve a lot of movement and activity. And I needed to rethink that, because what I had in mind, they couldn't have participated in. And so I had to adjust what I did, and I did. And so more of what I did was sort of debates and giving those people space, giving the people with cerebral palsy space to speak and share. But the physical things that I was going to do, I pulled them at the last minute, because I felt actually they won't be able to do this, and that was the right call. So I'm not a neurodiverse expert. What I would say as a little tip, if you're doing online stuff, a lot of online delivery, I do know for people with some neurodiverse challenges, is that if you have a fake background, you know, these groovy backgrounds, and you're moving your head a bit, and then there's a bit of fuzz, and there's a bit of fuzz here, and you've lost half an arm, there are some neurodiverse people who find that incredibly difficult. So one of the things I do, which is this is just a wall. I'm in somebody else's office at the moment because I'm between sessions and doing things. This is just a wall. I haven't put a groovy background on. I don't use groovy backgrounds. When I'm delivering from my own office, which is at home, I have like a wallpaper background that's real wallpaper. I don't have a fake background anymore. If you want to have a fake background, then you need to get the expensive plugins that absolutely ensure that you will not fuzz, because people with neurodiversity are going to find that difficult.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Ian shared that he is someone that suffers with anxiety, and your presentation has really helped him today. Ian's keen to get additional information in the future. Apart from reaching out to yourself, we had the contact details up. Are there any recommendations on any books or any online material that people could read?
Anxiety. There are the usual ones, you know. I've read Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I think with anxiety, a lot of it would be, I can't, was it a gentleman that yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Talking to some, the more you talk to some trusted friends, and that can help. I do think with speaking and anxiety, I used to be a very anxious person. When I first started public speaking, I always realized my knees were knocking, usually the adrenaline, and then I'd be like, everyone's seeing my knees knocking, and I used to get really hung up on this, and it really used to stress me out. What I have found is that by just learning to speak in front of small groups first, and put myself forward, so I was on my feet in small groups, and then working my way up in group size, that kind of helps. It definitely helps in the way that I memorize my stuff now in this drip fashion, because I know that whatever happens, I ain't going to forget my content, because that's the way I've learned. That is the way to learn, so that you will not forget. Because if you leave it to the last minute, I would be terrified if I stepped onto a stage and I didn't really know my stuff. I would. Probably, because I'm an experienced speaker, I could wing it. I probably could, but I don't feel fear now. But that's partly because I've been doing it a lot, but partly I always know my stuff inside out, back to front. So it doesn't matter if the slides go, whatever, I'll just carry on without them. But if you don't know your stuff, the slides going is a bit of a disaster. So some of it can come to really rehearsing and memorizing. And you could watch yourself, like I say, on your phone, film yourself, get used to seeing you. It will be awful at first, a horrible experience, but just keep doing it. And bit by bit, you get used to seeing yourself on phone. You get used to, actually, maybe I'll change that, I'll alter this. But I mean, there's so many books you could read on anxiety. Feel the Fear is obviously a great book in terms of dealing with fear. There's one by Dale Carnegie around, so he was writing in the 1920s. So you think, blimey, that's a long time ago. But his tips around how to worry less are brilliant. It's so relevant for today. He was writing at the time of the Great Depression. So I can't remember the exact title of the book. I've got it at home So, but do look at Dale Carnegie. He's got some great stuff on worry, even though it is very dated. It doesn't feel dated actually reading his book.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. I'm conscious of the time, but we've had a lot of lovely comments come through and some additional questions. I'm going to be a cheeky host, if you don't mind, and just ask one final question. Mamuna has asked, linked to the project profession, and I'd imagine a lot of people in our audience are project professionals. A lot of the presentations are about the project, the results. How would you close a presentation that's linked to a project when it would appear from the question, when you're just sharing results, there's no call for action necessarily? How would you look to close?
Yeah, in any result, there's a learning point that might be helpful that maybe needs to be identified and say, so because this result's been achieved, this is what we can focus on. We should do more of this. We could do less of it. I want you to do more. This has clearly worked. This hasn't clearly worked. So in any result, good or bad, I would naturally be trying to draw out some learning in order to close off. So there is some kind of a call to action, and it's not just some information sharing. So that's what I would do with results. I think you can make a call to action.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And I hope that helped with the question. Andrew, a pleasure as always having you on board. I'm going to send you a copy of the questions and all the lovely comments so you can take those forward. So thank you for giving up your time and your knowledge today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I wish everybody a really pleasant rest of the day.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Echo Andrew's comments. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, getting involved. There's been some great questions and compliments coming through, and as I say, I'll share those with Andrew. Please keep an eye out on the APM event page. We've got a whole load of events coming up, both virtual and face-to-face in your local community. So we hope to see you at future events very soon. Most importantly, keep well, and bye for now.
Thanks very much. Bye for now.